Welcome to the Continental. We hope you enjoy your stay.
Welcome to the Continental. I'm your host, Adam Mack, and on today's episode, we're talking sci-fi. We're going to go a little bit further on the love of Star Trek and the Star Trek Next Generation series, but with a little added twist. We're throwing in some of the oldies but goldies that made the Star Trek universe, and I'm going to call it the Gene Roddenberry universe of Star Trek. I know Star Trek is based on Gene Roddenberry's vision across multiple series now. We got the New Age stuff with Discovery and Lower Decks and so many more. We have the precursor original, but we're going to stick to Star Trek Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and Star Trek Voyager because Gene Roddenberry had his presence in those episodes. He was still around, and you can see it in the creation of those episodes and the impact they had in our life. But what would this podcast be if we didn't have somebody else's feedback to understand what those series meant to us? And today we got an extremely special guest, one of the best that I know of when it comes to not only just Star Trek, but just expressing how important things in life are to him. Please join me in welcoming our special guest for this evening, James. James,
Thank you, Adam. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, man. I'm glad you could be a first-time guest here on the Continental, and I hope this is just the beginning of many to come. And thank you for making your time here for us today.
No problem. I'm very excited. Looking forward to the discussion here.
Well, we've talked about it in the past, and when you heard I was doing this podcast, and you heard about Star Trek, you're like, "Whoa, really?" And I was like, "Whoa, you really like Star Trek?" And I don't know about you, but how often do you run across somebody who's still to our age, is so deeply embedded in Star Trek? Like outside of obviously going to conventions, but like in your day-to-day life, like how often do you run into somebody who loves Star Trek?
None, because it's funny, right? Like Star Trek, believe it or not, I don't think it ever took off in China. So I was raised in China all the way till I was 11 before I moved to Canada. And for all my life, before the move, I had no idea Star Trek was a thing. Now, Star Wars, on the other hand, it was a thing. Like the reach of Hollywood and the big screens eventually reached China. But I didn't get into Star Trek myself until after I moved to Canada. It's very rare. I don't have any friends because I have a lot of friends who are bilingual, and none of them are very well versed in Star Trek. A lot of them are very well versed in Star Wars, but not so much Star Trek. So no, not a lot of Star Trek, hardcore Star Trek fans out there. My wife watches Star Trek.
It just explains why you're together.
And not the other one. And the only thing I know is when I start making cultural references, and she'll be like, "Oh, I know that one. I just don't know which movie it came from." I was like, it's the other one with the red shirts and the blue shirts, not the red blades and the blue blades. It's the different ones.
Well, it's I feel the same way. I don't think I've run across even my closest friends. They're not hardcore Star Trek people. Star Wars, as you said, it's the action of Hollywood that reached so many, right? It was a cultural phenomenon. But also, be honest, Star Wars is a little bit before our time, to be honest, as well, right? Like the Star Wars started in, the 70s, and at least Star Trek: The Next Generation started in 1987, and ended with Voyager in 2001, which is like the prime of our lives. And I think the other thing that I was thinking about it that really makes a difference between Star Trek and Star Wars, and this will probably be another pod that maybe if you're not bored or anything like that, you can be another guest, which is, Star Trek is a little bit more about people interaction and, and problem solving day-to-day life, whereas Star Wars in the end of the day is this event, right? Like the rebels are trying to overthrow the Empire. That's it. There is no in between. Yes, I'm trying to find a way to be a Jedi, but the whole purpose of being a Jedi is to beat the Empire. no, outside of the books, there's no explanation of what happens after and how do you go about life, in this world where it's either the Empire or the Rebels. It's just
Yeah, I think there's a fine line between what you see as just a sci-fi entertainment or some sort of a sci-fi inspiration. I think the reason that most kids love Star Wars is you don't have to worry about why things happen. You
yeah,
know, you can drive a weapon the size of a planet and blow up other planets. Nobody ever questioned the physics behind that.
yeah.
It just happens. And then comes a couple episodes later, you have a planet, 20 times the size. Nobody ever questioned that, right? And I think that's the draw for those kind of movies. It's the same with the Warhammer universe, right? Nobody ever questions what happens in the Warhammer universe and why. You're a Warhammer fan yourself? Or
No, I only know the game itself, so I'm not.
it is just
Yeah.
redunculous. You're having a 1,000-year war fighting for the god emperor who has psychic powers that needs 1,000 virgin sacrifices every day. And then you think about it for a second and be like, that is bogus. But then you like the the really far-fetched, unbelievable, fantastical narrative of these films. And I think Star Trek appeals to a different type of audience. To me, I feel like my love for sci-fi, it was more or less inspired more so than Star Trek than it was with Star Wars, Star Wars to me was like fairy tale
Yeah.
sci-fi elements, whereas Star Trek was more on the realism side. You think about it, and like, okay, so this could happen. This theoretically is grounded in some fundamental science, and that kept things very interesting for me.
Well, it's the art of the possible. And honestly, the fact that, you said that makes me so happy, because that's exactly how I've come to see it now as an adult. It grounded me in seeing it as a kid every day. It was something that was feasible, something as small as focusing in on talking to the computer. Oh, that was kind of cool. Or the automatic sliding doors. You're like, oh, that's kind of neat. The phaser rifles, just like, okay, that's where it got into like more movie action stuff. But you're like, it wasn't like a planet destroying weapon that you're like, all right,
Yeah,
whatever,
it's
right?
not a lightsaber,
Yeah,
Even a lightsaber, like if you think about it for 2 seconds, like what the hell is a lightsaber?
well, it's funny you say that. I was just actually perusing YouTube, and if you ever have a chance to look, there's this group called the Hackensmith Company or something like that. They focus on making like whatever is in the movies possible, like stuff like Iron Man's repulsor cannon. But I just came across one where they made an actual lightsaber using it's plasma fire. I don't think it.
Cutter type of
Yeah,
deal.
but it could. It's like, but like, the size of a lightsaber, and and they had to compress it. There's no way they could make a portable power source, so they basically make compressed gas and attach it to your hip. It's pretty cool, except
Baby
that
steps.
it's baby steps.
I watched the same channel with the Iron Man one. That's how I
Yeah.
caught my attention, is the plasma cutter. I was like, holy shit, that could work, right? If they can miniaturize it, that could totally work. But lightsaber, though, that's like a whole different level.
James, you're making me think that you, as my guest, we're just going to agree about everything on this
Right,
podcast instead of a
I'm gonna
disagreeing.
start singing a different tune here.
But we're all running. We all watch the same stuff. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. No. It's no, but I agree with you, right? Like I said it on my first Star Trek pod episode, and it was something that was real. I come to realize that's what pulled me into that show. Every week it was something different. They didn't carry a single huge epic story. It was the day-to-day, problem solving and day-to-day cool technology that they would come to bear to solve those problems. I was like, oh, that's kind of neat. I think that's possible. Yeah, okay. Everybody was more or less happy, which is probably not totally realistic, but that's not the point. The point is to prove out what's possible, right? And I mentioned this, and I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but part of the other reason that made Star Trek, not just Next Generation, but Deep Space Nine and Voyager cool to me, was that all those ships had every representation possible from a crew perspective. That was really cool. You look at it from a age, sex, race, alien species, machine, or whatever, everybody was represented, everybody chipped in, and it was like, that's kind of cool. I think what's it called, Ensign Kim on Voyager, that was well, okay, I know Sulu was first, but Ensign Kim was the first like Asian person in like that was actually part of Starfleet that you saw on an everyday basis. I was like, oh, that's cool. They should have promoted him, but still, that was really cool.
What was Anson Kim gay?
Uh,
Or was that? Or am I mixing up with the new movies?
No. That's Sulu.
That's Sulu. That's
in the new movies.
In the new movies.
Yeah. So they kind of made his character. Yeah. They kind of aligned his character with the actor. Obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Sulu in the movies, in the new movies. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like, I thought that was awesome. Now that I think about it, I'm like, damn, that was a pretty copacetic kind of, Bohemian Rhapsody kind of world, and it made it seem like it was possible, right? So, the whole universe was pretty awesome, and I thought that years between 1987 to 2001 for those series, I thought they were amazing. So, but
what was your first Star Trek? What was your entrance to Star Trek world?
It was Star Trek Next Generation. It was, I think, I don't know exactly what episode, because I know I started after the show started, because in 1987, I was 5 years old. So there's no way my parents would be letting me watch even the benignest of Star Trek episodes, right? I think I got into it in about 92. So by that point, though, it was in syndication. So I watched it every single day, like at 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. at dinner time. My parents would just let me just binge watch Star Trek every single day. And it also made me realize, though, I think this is where we're going to realize that I'm quite a bit older than you.
Yeah.
What about you?
I didn't watch I heard of Star Trek Next Generation because that was the iconic one. But I started with in fact, the only series that I've invested the majority of my time in is Voyager. Watched it end to end. And I think I got lucky when I first started watching it. It was just like halfway through season 1.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know at the time. Like I barely spoke the language at the time. I just came to Canada, and there is Star Trek, and I watched it because, well, it's sci-fi and it's got big spaceships and phasers and aliens, and there's nothing better to watch on. It's either that or what else is going on at the time? Fairy Godparents. That's Entourage Fairy Godparents. What else? In terms of sci-fi back then, this was the Twilight Zone, but
and Deep Space Nine a little bit, and that's about it.
So there was Voyager, and I started early, and one thing I love about the show is that everybody enunciates in that show, which is a blessing for me because I didn't speak the language. It's like, well, I don't know what the hell everybody's talking about. Now the other shows, they talk too freaking fast. So I watch. If you pay attention to Voyager, I don't know if it's just the Voyager or it's the whole series, but they enunciate, like they say everything clearly.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, with Chakotay, it's a little, sometimes a little bit more difficult because he talks really freaking fast.
Yeah.
But it was nice, and I used that to actually learn how to speak English. And I pick up the hobby, I love the show, and learn the language. I think it's not bad.
Hey, another benefit of Star Trek never talked about, right? Help you learn English.
Absolutely. Like it was great, and you start to learn words, and to my surprise, the sci-fi mumbo jumbo is actually not that heavy in the show.
No.
Right? Like you learn about the everyday conversation stuff, and then it was very helpful.
Yeah, you know what? To your point about the enunciation part, I think that's something that sci-fi shows in general bring out. I've heard some actors describe that because there are terminologies in there that it's not the science, right? Like to your point, they don't talk about quantum mechanics. They don't talk about speed of light particles, and sometimes they talk about warp fields collapsing, but really they don't have a science they stick to. It's not like the Big Bang Theory where they actually fact check everything that they're talking about. But the usage of terms like warp fields, nacelles, phaser rifles, photon, quantum torpedoes, gamma rays, whatever. I've heard some of those actors on Star Trek specifically say they've actually had to slow down to specifically enunciate. Otherwise, it sounds like nothing when it comes out. If they go too fast, like you said,
That's
right?
right. You have to emphasize on the word, and then people are like, "Oh, wow, that's a cool sounding weapon."
Yeah, or even the aliens, if you think about it, right? Like, well, the Borg is pretty straightforward. What were some of the aliens?
There's the Cardassians, there's the
The
Klingon.
Klingons. I mean, I was thinking from Voyager. Remember the ones that when they first got to the Delta Quadrant, the
Caretakers? I can't
the
remember what they were
caretaker.
called.
It was the oh man, I forgot their names. I'm so bad. I can picture it in my head, but it's okay. Yeah, I don't. For some reason, for Voyager, the only species that really stick out are there's Talaxian for Neelix, right? So that one's pretty straightforward. There is the Borg. There's species 8472. That's because they kicked the Borg's ass.
Everybody, yes.
Yeah. So that one, those are the ones that stick out. But yeah, no, it's definitely yeah. Now I think about it, they're pretty good. It's the scripting was always really good and the execution was always good. But actually, so let me just start things off then. I know you've already mentioned Voyager. Is Voyager? Do you think that would be, say, your favorite Star Trek series out of Star Trek Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and Star Trek Voyager as you sit back and review it as an adult?
Well, I'm extremely biased because I haven't really watched the other shows. So I'm gonna have to say Voyager would definitely take the cake. I mean, I watched like YouTube clips here and there of the other shows. Just based on those interactions, I just feel like Voyager it feels more natural. It feels like maybe it's the acting because it's a newer show of all three. Like the acting just becomes more and more natural, more everyday. There's more relatable versus the other ones where the acting has to be very specific. You have an archetype of a character that you just have to fit in. Whereas Voyager, you pick out any character in Voyager, they all have a very complex history. Like there's no right or that's a good guy and that's a bad guy.
Yeah.
They all have their internal conflicts and they all have episodes specifically devoted to their internal conflict. I think one of my favorite episodes of Voyager of all times was the one about the doctor. There was an episode where he was pretending to be the captain of the ship.
I know what you're talking about.
He has to go and he had to save everybody and he has to be the captain of the ship and he eventually got taken advantage by some alien and then it kind of become this internal struggle because the doctor was always seen as someone who's a follower, who follows order, who has no self-directive because he's a hologram.
He's a program.
He's a program. He's built based on algorithm that was he's predestined to do things,
only
but not beyond it. Right, it's not beyond his destiny, and then you throw him into the whole midst of moral decisions. He had to, make all kinds of calls and have to think independently. And I just thought that was a brilliant show that really add a lot of depth to an otherwise one-dimensional character. And then ever since then, he became a very active member of the crew. He started to chime in and give advice. And so I was like, that's fantastic. And there is an episode like that for every single one of these crew members. And I thought, I freaking love it. I'm not sure that's the same thing with the other shows, but that was definitely what stood out for me is that maybe it was more of a coming of the age thing because I started watching it right when I was sitting my teenager years.
Yeah.
And I started to think, no, that's, because at the same time, like, what was it, 2001, 2002, around that time, what's happening on the other side of the trench is the Star Wars prequels were going on.
Oh
Right?
yeah, yeah.
That was the
That
time.
took everybody by storm, and they're like, "Oh, I
By
gotta go see it
storm,
again." Yep.
exactly. But one thing I hate about the prequels is that everybody is so dimensional. You know right
Yeah.
away who's the good guy and who's the bad guy.
There's no gray.
Whereas for Voyager, sure, everybody on the ship, they have a standard to uphold, but everybody's got their own inner demons, and people who appear to be happy
Mhm.
on the outside may not be happy, and people who are serious may not be always the serious face. So I love that, and then especially put it in that age from age 11 to age to 18, that period of time where you start to to discover your own identity, like who am I, right? And there's a lot of good materials out of
I will agree with you. Looking back on it, because I watched Voyager as well, and their character development was exceptional. I look back on it. To your point, every character there, from Captain Janeway all the way down to Ensign Kim, and even down to like Kess. Even though I think part of the reason why she kind of got written off the show is because she became a little bit super one-dimensional
She is.
for her role for the ship. Heck, even
Yes.
Neelix, they didn't. It's weird that they basically got left the show, but it didn't make sense for him to go back to the Alpha Quadrant. Zero,
No,
right?
no,
He
no.
would be the only alien from the Delta Quadrant there, right? So I get it, right? But to your point, every character, more than just one episode, I would say there was a significant character development across the board from beginning to end. And I will agree with you there that they really laid out, especially from the beginning when they started off with the Maquis crew joining the Voyager crew,
Mhm.
them having such a conflict with Chakotay, Torres, and then also with Paris being the rebel, the rebel Starfleet officer that they had to pick up from a penal colony.
Mhm.
Him finding not only just a character who grows into his role as an ensign, you know start following orders again as a Starfleet
Mhm.
officer, and then also getting a family. That's like holy moly,
Mhm.
right? So the Voyager, I think it out of the three episodes, out of the three series, you're right. The Voyager did the best at character development. I think Star Trek Next Generation, they do a little bit of it, and this will come up later in later on in the podcast. But I think some of the character in Star Trek Next Generation, the characters were varied. They had a lot of episodes that were dedicated to each person. So it also had developmental episodes. But
Mhm.
to your point, they didn't have an extreme swing, right? Like you didn't have a crazy redemption arc, right? I think the
No.
of all the characters on Next Generation that had the biggest arc was Commander Data, the android, because
Mhm.
his whole growth was I'm just an android in Starfleet. That's all I am, to becoming I'm a member of this Star Trek family and this crew where people would sacrifice for him and vice versa, right? It was more than, and he became the goal was to become more human. Or there was the Klingon security officer Worf, who was basically just this Klingon who everybody thought of as, okay, you got the warrior race Klingon on your ship, that's great, what does it actually mean? And he had a whole ton of story regarding his fight between fighting his Klingon heritage versus his human upbringing. So that was kind of cool. Deep Space Nine was, I think, the middle ground between Voyager and Next Generation. It started off with character development because Captain Sisko, if you ever go back and watch it, Captain Ben Sisko, he lost his wife in the Borg attack at Wolf 359. He had to raise his son by himself. He ends up on this like far outpost in the middle of nowhere, and suddenly is considered a prophet, and he has to be like, what the heck? How are you supposed to? It goes against everything he is as a Starfleet officer to be influencing this other culture, but at the same time he's trying to battle his own demons to you know of trying to overcome the fact that he lost his wife, and it's like, how are you supposed to forgive this life that cost him the love of his life, right? So it was, so they Deep Space Nine did a lot more character development than Next Generation. But yeah, to your point, I think Voyager did a great job of that character development and bringing it about across the whole 7 seasons. Now, it was out of all those characters, was there a favorite character that you liked the most? Like who was out of the Voyager crew did you love watching?
Um, I I mean, for Voyager is a toss up between the Doctor or the 719.
Oh yeah.
Like I is, and there's a bit of an underlying theme I think for these shows. Just after hearing what you said about the Next Generation, it's about inclusivity. It's about bringing culturally or seemingly outsiders into a big pot of things. And I was just thinking while you were talking, because these are some of the fantastic underlying morals that they dropped in the new movies. Because if you're thinking about the last two Star Trek movies, both of the movies are about the outsiders getting revenge for being outsiders. Right? Khan is an outsider that's been cast out, and so was I can't remember. It was the first one. There was the Captain Nero.
Idris Elba.
Captain Nero.
Oh yeah, from the first one. Yeah.
For the first one,
Yeah.
that was also an outsider. Idris Elba. That was his character was also abandoned as an outsider, and it was very different from the TV show, which almost always promotes inclusivity, and the biggest character developments are the outsiders coming in and becoming integral part of the team. And that's what I like about the Doctor and the 7 of 9, both coming from such if you think Paris is bad, right? I mean, 7 of 9,
she was a
Christ.
Borg.
He was a Borg. She was captured. She tried to kill the ship, like that is so far out in the other end of the spectrum. That redemption arc is tremendous, right? It took how many seasons for that to get back, and I love those. Like I love how people like that, against all odds, trying to find a voice in a group. It's great. I mean, when you were younger, like when I watched it, I had no idea what's going on in the world, right? That you don't know what you don't talk about race, you don't talk about privileges and all of that. You don't think about it. Even though I was a little Asian boy in Canada, which by all means is a fantastic country, inclusivity is fantastic, but you don't think about those type of issues, and you watch these TV shows and you think that is the norm.
Yeah.
Even though after you grow up, you realize it may not be as idealistic, but because you watch those TV shows growing up, in your mind, they give you a sense of that's right, and this is not right.
Yeah.
And that's very good for I guess, for me, because now I, teenager years, right? You're watching those shows and you're creating your own moral compass, and you start to think, okay, yeah, I like that more. I like the outcome of that. 7 of 9 was fantastic. I especially enjoy the episodes where her and the Doctor sort of had this symbiotic relationship, where they both being the only.
They're similar in a similar boat.
Yeah, in very similar boat, in the sense that they both can be disabled. They're non-biological life forms, and that them kind of try to figure this new life out, just from their own point of view, is fascinating. Like is every time when the Doctor mentioned that he doesn't need to eat because he's a hologram, I just crack up. I was like, how many times do you have to say that, right? But then it is part of his life. He is different, and he needs to embrace his difference and to join. Who's your favorite character?
Well, what's funny, you mentioned those two who, I look at it as the Doctor and 7 of 9 are somebody who are trying to discover their humanity, essentially, and how they fit into this world of living beings where their origins or what they've known is they've been told they're not living beings. And guess what? My favorite character is actually in a similar boat, which is Lieutenant Commander Data on Star Trek Next Generation. He is an android, in origin, but even to the point throughout the whole series, even his existence or his ability to, you know, basically, I would say, take hold of the fact that I am a life form is always in question. Heck, there was an episode, which is one of my most favorite episodes, where he's put on trial to see if Starfleet could actually take him away and take him apart. And the captain had to basically argue that he was a life form that deserved the rights and privileges of a life form to make a decision for himself. And it's similar, but his arc is similar to 7 and 9 and the Doctor, right? He had to be comfortable with who he was first before he could discover his humanity. Yes, he's an android. Yes, he's not like everybody else, but yes, he wants to understand emotion. He wants to be able to understand why people respond a certain way to certain comments or certain actions, right? And he wants to be a part of the team to contribute, even though he might be like, for the doctors, in the doctor's instance, like you were saying, he was nervous about breaking beyond his borders to take control, like, and pretend to be the captain when he was fighting off those aliens, right? He was very hesitant to do that, and he needed to break out of his own shell. Data is like that too. He was always just looked at as, heck, somebody who's faster, stronger, but he can just process. But he's just an android, right? Nobody could think that he could actually take command or come up with ideas until he was actually thrust into that position to do so. And I don't know. I just, that kind of character, that I think, hey, it goes back to what you're saying about self-discovery, right? Seeing that and saying, hey, that's something I can totally relate to. I want to grow to that. So that was my favorite character. It speaks to something about teenagers watching these shows. It's a very positive. It creates a very positive imprint. I think I should make sure I have these all downloaded for my kid. Same for you.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Just to add, because you mentioned about them trying to find their humanity. Sometimes I don't know if it's just humanity that they're trying to find. They're trying to find several things. But is it to be more human? Maybe. But you think about the shows, like the other races in the shows, like the common grounds that they share, is not necessarily to be more human, right? One thing that is a recurring theme with these sort of artificial type of characters, is the search for mortality, or is the question facing mortality. And that's another reason I love, the Doctor and 709. That one episode when the Doctor has to be forced to be transferred from the ship's holoprojector into the mobile
the mobile emitter
projector.
Yeah.
That one, it really exposed him to the idea of permanent non-existence, right? Which to biological beings like us would just be death.
Yeah.
And that really made you question, if you didn't have that constraint, what would you do? Would you even think about it? And the reality is we don't think about it. We don't think about it enough. We live as if we were to live forever until we're faced with the hard truth that we are not. And then you start to prioritize your life a little better, I hope, right? And that's one thing I love. I mean, it is a concept that is, obviously, when you try to show it to someone who's 13-year-old, that is a little too early for them to show. But it is also a fantastic concept to introduce to people of that age, because when you're 13-year-old, nobody's going to come to you and talk about death. Everybody is about after you die, you'll be in a happy place forever and ever and happily ever after, right? And I feel like society as a whole needs to embrace mortality. I think one of the fundamentals benefits of humanity, and that is also thankfully a tone that is consistent across most of the sci-fi films, which is the mortality piece. Is that because what you have is not unlimited in terms of time, and that makes what you have left that much more valuable, and you have to realize the value and you have to embrace the value, because value stems from choices, and the choices that you make means there's going to be choices that you can't make, there are going to be sacrifices, and that what inherently makes the choices that you made more valuable.
More important. Yeah.
Yeah, and now you're like thinking back, like as an adult, you don't know that these things were actually in the show, but now you're thinking back and you'd be like,
Wow.
damn, that is
That's some next level existential stuff.
that's right. There's a lot of lessons to be learned in these shows, and you just don't realize. Um, I mean, the other thing is, altruism, and that was another show I think Voyager is specifically Paris and Chakotay. I think Paris is more of an extreme version where he started off more of a selfish type of character, and that was very apparent at the beginning. And
coming out of jail, so yeah.
Coming out of jail, and his redemption arc is obviously from being selfish all the way to being selfless or being altruistic. Commander Chakotay is a lot more nuanced, and I love when the character is a lot more nuanced because Commander Chakotay is inherently altruistic, but because he was part of the Marquis, and then he felt like he had a responsibility to his crewmates or to his previous teammates and to have his interest or their interest at heart. And now because he was also first officer, he had to make difficult decisions based on the common goods of the crew or the common goods of his own team. And that nuance create a lot of interesting problems. And that nuance actually, now that I'm a little older, is essentially is what turns my hair gray, right? Right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden you're faced with the complete benefit of your clients versus your team's resources, or sometimes you have multiple clients and you only have that much time or that much energy, and which one do you drop? Yeah, that's what do you think about it, right?
Well,
I'm reading too much into these shows.
No, you know what, and that's something that I'm curious to understand your take on, and I think you already started off with a good thing. There was two ways that we look at these shows. One is how did you perceive it as a kid, but now 20 years later, because Voyager ended in 2001, it's now been 20 and almost 30. It's been 32 years, 33 years since Star Trek Next Generation started, and 20 years since Star Trek Voyager ended. So you look back on it now, is how do you see it as an adult versus how you saw it as a kid? And as a kid, quickly, it was just super cool, right? I think we touched upon it.
As a kid, you're in it for the spaceships. That's it.
Yeah,
No
the spaceships, the technology, and honestly, like for me, the problem solving was kind of cool. Just every day, it's like, oh, something new, something cool, right? But now, I think, as you said, as an adult, you look back on it, and I don't even have to go back and watch these shows. Like, I've seen so many of them so many times. I just think about it a little bit more, even when preparing for these pods. You realize a lot of these episodes had so much more nuance associated to it for all three series, like Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, all had such lessons embedded in their characters as well as the episodes they had to problem solve for. Now, if you ever get a chance to look at Deep Space Nine, it kind of bridged the gap between what you experienced with Voyager and what Star Trek Next Generation did, right? The characters were, I think, had much more depth. Like, to your point, Star Trek Next Generation was a little bit more flat in terms of their growth. Like, they did grow, but they were pretty consistent and strong characters throughout. Deep Space Nine, every character had an inherent flaw as well, and they had to grow based upon being forced into the situation of, hey, I'm on this space station in the middle of nowhere, and suddenly it goes from a middle of nowhere station to the center of the Alpha Quadrant because this wormhole shows up that can let me into another part of the quadrant that spits out all sorts of like craziness. And it created character development through the busyness of their universe. I especially like, obviously I mentioned Captain Sisko is a great character, his character arc to follow. They had similar to actually Data, the Doctor, and 7 and 9, they had a character called Odo, who is a shapeshifter, and he was exceptional character because he went from thinking he was the only being of his species to ever exist, to then finding out his species was basically a dominating tyrant in another quadrant, to then realizing that he himself could, because of his experience, change the whole character of his. Oh, actually, sorry, I skipped one step. Going back to your thought about mortality, being turned into a mortal being to understand and realize the value of your existence, and not just shrinking back from the responsibility that you have to make a difference in this world. And then him basically being the factor that changes their pseudo war on Deep Space Nine. So he had a pretty crazy arc himself. But to your point, as an adult, I look back on it now and I'm like, I realize how much those episodes imprinted who I am as a character and how I treat the rest of things in life. Not only just for one, seeing all these races and, you know, beings all working together, to your point, that set my mind as that should be the right way and successful way to move forward across the board. It's not just about one versus, it's not like the Borg where, you know, we are the Borg, we're going to assimilate you, we're just going to be the Borg, right? It was, we can all work together to make this thing happen. And I think that was pretty impactful to me now that I look back on it. And obviously the technology and the art of the possible and what we can achieve through all that togetherness, but also the individual lessons of just trying to figure out who you are, and it's okay to like fail, and it's okay to, you know, be knocked back. And I think, you know, Deep Space Nine, Voyager were better at showing me that it's okay to lose. Actually, like in Deep Space Nine, they basically got themselves booted off their space station, but you know, they were able to move forward and find a way and figure it out. And but anyway, what about you? What do you how did, when you look back on it now as an adult, you know, what are the things that you see in yourself that you got from those shows? Or is there anything that that really you're like, whoa, I think this thing was really an impact in my life?
One thing, well, first of all, I think the Star Trek was the reason that got me interested in technology in the first place.
Yeah.
Um, it's just so fascinating what things could do. But the other thing is just that failure is commonplace. Um, in fact, almost every episode of Star Trek has a failure somewhere. It's either at the beginning or somewhere in the middle. I mean, that's what makes these shows interesting, is the challenge that the characters have to overcome, right? If there's no challenge, everybody's just business as usual. But what it really taught me is that failure, even at a colossal scale, sometimes is okay. I'm not saying I'm going to promote, you know, failure at colossal scales, but at least at a personal level, that it is okay. It is okay to make mistakes. It's okay because there is no set right or wrong as a person or even as a way of doing things. Because if you're a different person and you have a different take, just for example, when I think Taurus in Voyager, Taurus has always been sort of the one that's at times against uh, the captain's orders. She's the outspoken one.
Stubborn one, yeah.
Yeah, and there were times where, you know, she tried her ways and it didn't work out, and sometimes it did work out. Um, and it was very enlightening. So for me, like that's the biggest takeaway. Is just watching these people struggle to overcome, and there was always another problem to solve, and never to freeze and to be paralyzed at the face of ultimate destruction, because there's always one more thing that they could try before it's all over, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Or in the case of Voyager, maybe it was a time loop that some alien species had set upon, and they're like, we'll just reset it.
there's always a way. There's always a way out, and that is important, because you have to think about it, you know. And most of the problems we encounter in our lives, even the ones that we thought, oh, this is it, you know, this is such a a terrible mistake or predicament I'm putting myself into, this is it. But then you realize after this is done, it's like, okay, I'm still here, and I'm still pretty much intact. It's really not as bad as we think it is. And I think we need more of that. I think right now, with social media, with just the way that we consume information, it's always like a do or die type of deal. It's always like this is the final straw, and that's what gets people's attention. If it's not do or die, you wouldn't click on that link.
Yeah.
But it's not, right? When you make a mistake, you have to ask yourself, how would this mistake affect me 5 years from now? Or would it affect me 5 years from now? If it doesn't, is it worth the amount of effort, emotional investment I'm putting myself through right now?
Yeah.
And Star Trek, yeah, that's the most valuable. It just kind of taught me to be at peace with when things aren't going well, because there's always a way out.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with you there. All the series, every problem may not necessarily be solved, although, being a television series, they eventually find a way to being solved,
Plot armor.
Plot armor. It's how they built it, right? It's every episode, or in the case of Voyager and the whole series, they eventually get back home, even though it's supposed to take like 100 years. But at the end of the day, they still go through the trials and tribulations individually or as a group to figure out what needs to be done, and they don't just react and say, oh, it's game over, right? And I think to your point, today's world, everything is a reaction to what's out there, and we could all do better by just taking a step back and say, what's the big picture? What are we trying to go towards? What are we trying to build towards, as a group? And we gotta see, this is the one thing that I wish, though, that the world would take away more from Star Trek. And I feel like sometimes, and I don't know what you think about this, but I think like lately it feels like with the invention of the internet, there's so many voices, so much feedback, which should be a good thing because people now have an equal voice. However, it's created this thing of tribalism where people are like, no, I don't want to do what you do. I'm just going to go and do my own thing based upon these ideologies. In the end of the day, we're all just one honking people, right? Like, it's like the climate change stuff. This pandemic is a good example of, there's some things that don't give two bananas about who you are, what your ideals are. They're just going to run rampant over everything. So in the end of the day, we are, as a human race, let's just call it what it is, we're all in the same boat together. We're all going to live and die together, and we can either choose to evolve together, or we can all just, the opposite is something not to be, well, maybe we just got to realize that there's a mortality factor into play here, and that we could all just cause ourselves a lot of problems down the road. But I don't know.
I wish people will understand sort of the critical thinking and objectivity that these TV shows try to teach the population.
Yeah.
It is very subtle. Like, it is very subtle. Like,
Yeah.
people take it for granted. People, when you see Starfleet officers, even you're looking at a yellow shirt, or blue shirt, like, you don't realize that these, even if they're just an ensign, they are trained and they're qualified, and they are there not because of they pretend to be who they are. They're there because they can objectively identify what's right or what's wrong, and they have the training necessary. These days, I feel like, because everything is always a simple 5-step tutorial away, people tend to simplify a lot of things, and people tend to, and when you start to simplify things, then you don't really take knowledge and expertise that seriously, and all of a sudden you start to question the experts based on Well,
There's an easier
essentially,
answer.
there's a way easier answer
Yeah.
based on your confirmation bias,
Yeah.
right? And then what you end up with is the flat earthers, you end up with the climate change deniers and the anti-vaxxers and the Trump supporters. And, is the root of these questions is just one is the lack of critical thinking, or rather the unwillingness to critically think. And two is the rather fantastic willingness to just take the shortcut and to give in to your own confirmation bias. You form an answer in your head and you don't look for the real answer, you look for essentially supporting documents for your answer that is formed in your head. And trust me, there are plenty of people out there on the internet that's willing to give it, but that's not going to get you anywhere further than where you are, right? I wish more people watch TV series like the Star Trek series. What else is a good TV that's kind of following the same methodologies?
I'm just gonna be honest here. I haven't been able to find any, and maybe that's because I'm getting older and I just don't watch as much TV. But I haven't found shows because that gear towards a consistent problem-solving um, type episodic kind of design. Most are designed around a season that's telling a story that's on a cliffhanger kind of entertainment, right? There is less,
Right.
and I'm not gonna blame 24 for this because it worked. It was super successful. But I blame 24 for this because when 24 came around in the early 2000s, basically everybody was like, "Oh, you could get people to, immediately look for your next episode because you could give a cliffhanger that's for the whole series." We're all doing that now. It's like every show turned into like this one long montage to this one Star Wars type storyline that there has to be a beginning and it has to be an end. And an example I'll give you of what converted to that. If you ever watch Suits, that lawyer show Suits,
Yeah.
the first 3 seasons were all these episodic type. Okay, what's the problem? Who's suing who? How am I supposed to resolve it? Is it a negotiation? Is it a legal battle, or is it whatever, right? Even though the lawyer stuff around it apparently is all mumbo jumbo, and they just like there's no way that a legal lawyer would be doing real estate law as well as criminal, and it's all like whatever, right? But it was cool in the sense they were trying to problem solve and get through people, right? But then they switched to, oh no, it has to be this one villain in the beginning and we have to beat him at the end. And it's like, I was like, what is this? And I'm like, I kind
That's
of.
what sells the season, right?
It sells us going back to your
want to
clickbait.
watch this. Yeah, that's your clickbait. You want to get to the end.
Yeah.
You don't want to, that's viewership, I suppose.
Even one of the best sci-fi shows that I'd love to talk about one day is, but they're not episodic. Is unfortunately it's a long storyline. Is The Expanse. I don't know if you ever.
I heard of it. I haven't started watching it. I was still catching up on some of the older shows.
Yeah.
Finished Umbrella Academy the other day. The 2 seasons, which I thought was interesting. Right now, we're catching up on The Blacklist, which is not a sci-fi show. It's more of a
it's thriller.
It's a thriller show, which is also fun. But I haven't come across. I started watching The Orville. I like The Orville. I'm like 3 episodes in, and have you seen it?
No, I've only seen a handful, just like off that. I know I've read the premise. That's why I know I'm familiar with what it is. I want to
look at it. I mean, Seth MacFarlane, like, sure, he's comedy is his forte, but The Orville is how I would perceive, in a way, if I were to work at a Starfleet. Like, I do not see myself as an ensign at the Voyager. Like, these people are way too polite and way too proper. It's almost robotic. Even at Voyager, like, even like they try to humanize it in a way, but it still feels very robotic. Like, there's no banter in the hallway. There's no.
There's a lack. There's almost a little bit less socialized, like the human. The human affliction, which is,
too professional.
Yeah.
In all the shows that you mentioned earlier in this pod. But take a look at The Orville. Like, The Orville is funny, but at the same time, it feels very human. Like, especially the interaction, the interspecies interaction. Like the questions you should have probably asked, and not take them for granted. And
Yeah.
and then when they get asked, and then you get the answer, and you get the reaction, and like, oh yeah, that's how I would typically do this, right? Like when you're under stress, you never in Voyager, you never see somebody who's under stress, first time taking command, start chucking down 2 shots of tequila. But in a real life situation, you'd be like, hell yeah, captain's down, first officer's down, the next in command is down, and here is me. I'm going to taking over the ship.
Yeah.
What the hell am I supposed to do? I got to chuck down 2 tequilas first, right? and you go, yeah, that's about right.
That's probably more realistic.
That's about right. Take a look at it. I mean, for a teenager, that's probably not the best way to portray. I mean, it doesn't.
That one sounds more adult oriented.
It is. That's what Seth MacFarlane is about, right? Family Guys. It's creating comedy and on the surface childish premises for adults.
Yeah. Well, the other one I would say then is recently they brought out, which was the Starfleet or Star Trek Lower Decks. It was the animated thing, but it's more of like an adult animation, where it's essentially they talk about the non-command crew staff. It's everybody else basically on the ship who has their own jobs, and like how do they basically, do everyday life? Like like if you're not on the bridge, there's still 1,000 people on the ship.
That's
What are
right.
they doing, right?
That's
Right.
right.
So it's supposed to be geared around that, and it was recently, I think, opened up at that San Diego Comic-Con, the virtual stuff. They talked about it. It was it started in September, so I thought it'd be something interesting. Okay, well, I want to save some of your time. I want to end it. This pod by getting your thoughts about what is some of the best that you remember from these shows. Whether it could, even though you didn't watch Star Trek Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, or Voyager, it's okay to start with Voyager. I'll try to convince you that some of these shows have some extremely good things about it that would be worthwhile. But I call this segment of the podcast the Best of Awards. And off the top of your head, whatever you can think of, you tell me what you think, okay? It'll be about the sci-fi series. So I'm going to start off, award time. I want to start off with like the Nicholas Tesla Award, I will call it, for the best sci-fi technology that you want to see today from the Star Trek series.
Fabricators, hands down. It was a toss-up between holographic decks or fabricators. And then you start thinking about it, it's like, yeah, holographic decks is fun, but we don't need that much stimulation. We're stimulating enough, right? We need some peace and quiet. Fabricator, on the other hand, see, that thing is magical. Whatever you need, money goes in, stuff come out. Like, that's what I need. That's what I need.
So you know what? I will say, you got me there. The holodeck was my number one personally. It's just to be able to get that see any experience that you can think of or imagine. And that brings the art of the possible to the forefront. Although, to be honest, it may be a little bit overstimulus, but heck, man, that would be so cool.
You need one of these. That's what you need, right?
So, to your point, my next follow-up to that is, who do you think will come first? Because it is a technology race. Because both of those are very possible. Because the replicator, I don't know if you've seen some of those clips of the 3D printers leveraging basically basic proteins and building up food from 3D replicators, using 3D replicators, where the source material is just basic proteins. Now, flavor-wise, I've read, that it doesn't taste like anything, but like they're getting better at it little by little. It's like they're edible. The core thing is it's edible, right? So now you're like, well, you got the Oculus on one side. You're like, oh dang, what's coming, right? It's coming, and I would like, all of that. It's crazy. It's only been 20 years, and that stuff is coming to reality.
It's there. That's right.
It's here.
Right. I mean, the Oculus, they came up with a second one, better resolution and stuff like that. What I'm really excited about is not so much the VR aspect of these, but the AR, augmented reality, the ability to project screens in front of you and actually work. Because right now, it has like a built-in computer screen and stuff like that you can work technically. But because it's VR is enclosed, you don't get to see your surrounding. It gets really tiring after a bit. Like I try to work on this, so yeah, definitely. I would say the holodeck. I mean, it depends your definition of the holodeck, because by Star Trek standards, holodeck has some sort of force projection, and you can touch things.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. That's far away. But what you can see, that's already here. Whereas with the replicators, I don't need much. Just make me stuff. Make me drinks, which is already here. Right? You can already make drinks, like the Soda Stream stuff or the Keurigs, right? Now it's just making me food. I mean, I'm easy. I'm an Asian guy. Rice with anything else is food, right? So we're starting small, Bring me something that can cook me rice and just spray some, I don't know, whatever, protein stuff on it, and I'm good to go.
Yeah, you know what? It's I guess the appeal of the holodeck to me is, especially if you think about our current situation, just being able to experience some things in the world that you would never be able to I don't know how easy it would be to experience. If I could find my way on the top of Mount Everest, it would be an awesome, epic opportunity to train for that, do it and be like, holy moly, yes, I'm at the top of Mount Everest or top of Mount Kilimanjaro or something like that. However, there is so much opportunity and cost in life. I'd be like, hey, I'm not going to go tell my family, see you later. I'm going to spend, 5 figures and probably spend 2 hours a day training. I'm not going to hang out with you. Right. So some people make that choice. That's fine. Just not me, right? If I could just go see it, just experience, yeah, that's great. I'm all for it, right? I understand the experience is in the journey sometimes, but some things I just want to damn see. Just see it. I'm like, okay, good stuff. The Galapagos Island, I think it is something like that, where you have those crazy 50-foot waterfalls. I'm like, yeah, that's great. I don't want to spend 5 figures, go there and see it. Okay, that's great. My parents have seen it. Yeah, I saw the video. It's that's cool. If I could get a holographic image of it, yeah, that'd be and be there, pretend. Okay, good enough for me. But yeah. I get your point. The food thing would be cool, But sometimes, I'm a little bit lazy. See a little bit of reality. Hey, we are on a podcast here instead of being face to face. It would be better.
I'm surprised neither of us mentioned the teleporters.
I am like Lieutenant Barclay, if you remember him.
Yes, he's the teleporter guy.
The teleporter guy, but and he was the hologram guy too. Actually, he was the holodeck. He loved making holodeck stuff. He was actually part of the doctor program. I don't remember, but he was.
So. Was he the guy that played Saul Goodman? No, maybe he just looks like him.
No, he kind of looks like him. He has that kind of half hair thing. Yeah, no, you got that. But that. The way he describes getting your molecules broken down and getting shifted over.
There's a bit of a mortality problem with that.
Yeah. That was just
that's right. Like when you come out on the other end, are you really you?
Are you really you?
Or are you just a you who remember everything up to the point that you got broken down? Right?
Yeah, what if you is your memory missing because you might have forgot to put one piece of data here? In today's world, this data stream itself, there's no guarantee that it's actually 100% the same from me to you and you to me. So.
Well, that leads to a greater existential problem. Because are you really you right now as time progresses? How do you know you didn't die the last second? It's just another version of you carrying on with all the memories. So
and that's why I also don't bring up cloning, for example, even though they had cloning on Star Trek as well. Yeah. I don't need to play around with are you or you I or am I you? That's okay.
Oh, that's all messed up. Yeah.
Okay. All right. The next award. Let's get this one, and I'm gonna have to convince you otherwise. But out of the 3 series, we're gonna go with the USS award for which one is the best starship. We got the Starship Enterprise, and we'll go stick with the TV series NCC 1701D for Star Trek. The Starship Enterprise. We have on Deep Space Nine, if you've ever seen it, the USS Defiant, or we got the USS Voyager. Which one is your favorite ship? Or which one do you think is the best ship? I think.
I mean, that's difficult because on the surface they're all Starfleet ships, and they're all pretty good ships. They're like heavy cruisers. Um, I mean, I watch Voyager the most. See, what I like about Voyager, and I don't know if it's the same thing with the other shows, is that Voyager always comes in, at least for most of the episode, as a more advanced ship in comparison to the races that it encounters.
Yeah.
Like Voyager is always shown as we are the Starfleet, and we are the powerful, and we're here to help, right? So I think Voyager, is cozy. But if you allow me to expand that, because that list is fairly limited for me, I can't really speak on the other two. But if you allow me to expand that ship and to go beyond Starfleet, I would say if I were to, find another ship, I would go with the Borg Spear. Believe it or not. I don't know. I think, okay, so all the evil robotic, communism stuff aside, of the Borg, I think the Borg sphere is nice. You have your infinite, you have your holodecks, because every time you go into a sleep cycle, you're dreaming. You're going into a holodeck. You do whatever the heck you want. Never have to worry about food. Don't really have to worry about energy. You can go wherever the heck you want. You're really not going to be shot down by anyone, right?
Yeah.
I would say if I were to pick a ship to travel or go on vacation, I'll probably go on the Borg Sphere. It's got everything I need.
Okay.
No fuzz.
You
all the benefits.
I hate to say it, you've convinced me. I was totally just thinking of the 3 ships, and honestly, there's so many ships, but out of all of them, heck, even with the Dominion ships or Species 8472 or any of them.
Not that ship. I thought about that ship too. That was like it's yucky in there.
Yeah, it's just like some goop or whatever.
You're like in the middle of a whale.
Yeah, it's a liquid or something like that, right? It's like liquid space they found or something. But the Borg ship, okay, that one takes the cake. Because honestly, it's the most efficiently designed, run, and executed ship. And they have access to transwarp, so done and done.
And see, I didn't go with a cube because the cube are expandable. A cube is what they can send to the front lines, but a sphere, being a command ship, that's something that you can fly around the backland. You're not being afraid to be sent out. So,
all right, sounds good. All right, we're gonna go with the next up, the Gene Roddenberry Award for the crew award, the crew call, the crew roll call, and we're gonna hit them fast. So you give me your best, and we'll talk about them briefly, so we get at the same time.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Who's the best ensign?
The guy in the transporter room. I'm serious. I don't know their name. I don't know their name, but whoever's in the transporter room in whatever Star Trek universe that you're from, that's the best ensign. Imagine how many people that could have accidentally died because he didn't do his job.
That's true.
Like he's more important than the engine. The engineers is more important than the security. Like and there's so many clutch moments where just wouldn't happen because the guy in the transporter room, hands down.
That's that's a good one because in fact Deep Space Nine, Miles O'Brien, their chief engineer, was actually formerly the transporter chief, and he's the one. Yeah, he's the last minute. It's like, chief, you got him? Oh, okay, good. You got him. All right, good. Then you got him. Okay. All right. Next up, best doctor.
Doctor. I don't know what. This got a name?
No, he's just called the doctor. Actually,
he's the doctor.
He's just the doctor.
He's the doc.
Yeah. No, EMT Mark 1 because there was the Mark 2. But it was just a doctor. I will say, okay, Star Trek Next Generation, like Beverly Crusher, she was the mom factor. But if you ever get it interesting, the one on Deep Space Nine, Dr. Bashir, he's kind of interesting guy. It was they had a crazy character arc for him. He turned into he was actually genetically altered as a kid. So halfway through the series, he basically said, "I've been faking being an idiot doctor. I actually have enhanced hand-eye coordination and technical and eidetic memory and all this other stuff." And he's like, so they basically flipped his character around and all that. It was kind of interesting. He was a pretty crazy character. All right, security officer. I guess you really only have Tuvok if you really only watch Voyager.
I mean, I have Tuvok, but I was also comparing it to the new movies. I'm trying to remember. I don't really like Tuvok. I mean, I know that's the only option I have, but I don't really like Tuvok. I think he really sucks at his job. I feel like the whole Voyager thing, I feel like Chakotay will be a much better security officer, and then Tuvok will be a much better first XO. Because like Chakotay is too, I feel like he's too emotional, whereas the XO needs to be more calm and level-headed and is able to see
he's still a
things more
commander.
objectively.
Yeah, he's still more of a commander, right? Like,
yeah, I guess if Tuvok's my only choice, Tuvok it is. But I don't like him. I think Tuvok. If there were one character I don't really quite like is Tuvok. I don't know. I mean, I get it. He's Vulcan and he's got his own thing going on, and I don't know.
Yeah, I can't go with Tuvok. It's just not going to happen. And I would go with Worf from Star Trek Next Generation. And
I watched a couple of YouTube. I feel like Worf is a better suited for security. Like, it's got the tactical thinking, and it's also got the risk-taking mentality. Yeah, Tuvok, I don't know. Tuvok is too Vulcan for me. Too Vulcan for his own good.
Yeah. You need a little oomph, like, for security. A little emotion. Otherwise, it's just like, I can't believe you're going to.
And also, Tuvok is too skinny. Like, I feel like if you're going to be a security, chief of security, you want to look the part, right? Tuvok is a little too scrawny for that.
Hey, but Vulcan, super strength, right? Spock kicked the
super strength, space elves, all that kind of stuff.
All right, next up, best. Well, okay, I'll combine these two since they're basically the same. Either best engineer or science officer. They're similar. So your options really, I guess, from your perspective, it's either Torres, Ensign Kim, B'Elanna Torres, Ensign Kim. On Star Trek Next Generation, it was Geordi LaForge or Commander Data for science. For Deep Space Nine, it was Lieutenant Dax, and, well, Chief Engineer, it was Miles O'Brien.
Can I include the latest Star Trek movies?
Yeah, go ahead. So you get Scotty. You either have Scotty or Spock.
Scotty. Gotta be Scotty. I mean, that's how I imagine an engineer will be.
Yeah.
An engineer is not somebody, at least in my mind, an engineer at a starship, they have to be creative and they cannot be calm and by the book. And I think both Torres and Ensign Kim, they're too by the book. Like, you're out there in the Delta Quadrant and you're trying to do things by the book. That's not going to get you nowhere. You got to be a little, you have to be a little hacky. MacGyver your thing around. And Scotty is the engineer that I would take. He's a little unstable. He's a little, but he will be the one that come up with a solution that nobody has thought of.
Yeah, I can't argue with that because they actually had Scotty, the original, on Star Trek Next Generation, working with LaForge, and he had to come up. They found him, by the way, the same age as when he left the movies, because guess what? He basically put a loop on a transporter because his starship crashed on a Dyson sphere, just this planet, and they had no way off, and they had no food, so they're like, okay, how am I going to survive? How are we going to survive? Oh, screw this. They basically cycled the the transporter beam amongst itself and put their body in a transporter buffer for 50 years until somebody found them. And fortunately, the Enterprise found them, and they were able to they were able to save him, but they also then had a little cool how do I get out of the Dyson Sphere scenario. So yeah, okay, Scotty's yeah, okay, I'm gonna bow to that one. Scotty's got to win that one.
Mhm.
All right, two more. Best XO commanding officer, second in command, number one. I think Chakotay already fell off your bandwagon. No.
Chico, yeah, like I said, if Tuvok were a second in command, I would be a lot more happier.
Yeah.
Not just from like if I were a Starfleet admiral and I would talk to Janeway and I'd be like, you need someone to hold the fort while you're going on to your risky adventures, and Chakotay is not that someone. See, that's what like actually in the new movies, that's a Spock is a great second in command.
Yeah.
Because it contrasts well with because as a captain you need to be a bit more risk taking.
Yeah.
Right? That's who that's what your job demands it. But whereas your second in command needs to be in opposition. I feel like Janeway and Chakotay are of the same personality.
Yeah.
Which is why when they get into an argument is a little strange because neither of them are risk averse. They're both very risky.
Yeah.
Very risky characters.
You don't get that balance of okay, wait a minute.
Yeah, that's
I don't
no
know
balance. So if I can pick Spock, I would definitely go with Spock.
Yeah. Well, so for Next Generation, they did the opposite, where the captain was the logical and strong character, whereas the second in command was this young, like he was the Kirk to like, whereas Captain Picard was the the Spock kind of, no, I got control of this, just trust me, I can handle this, whereas Commander Riker was the one, you should jump in, do this, right? And I thought, to your point, you have to have that balance, otherwise how are you gonna your second command needs to be somebody you need to bounce ideas off of. They either oppose you or they'll be like, okay, I see where you're coming from, but there's another angle that you could take.
That's right. So you cannot have your best buddy with the same personality to be in the second in command. Like it just needs to be the opposite. Like you're a Battlestar Galactica fan.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's sort of the opposite, right? We have Ty, who's more risk taking, and now we have Adama, who's more level headed.
Yeah, it's like no. Yeah.
But it's still, well, I mean, not to spoil anything, but I think that duo works well. Like one is a little crazy in the head, and the other one's not so much. You need a crazy one, you know.
But that's an existential question itself. Was he really crazy, or was that?
Is he just,
you know. Spoiler. You should watch that show if you're checking this.
Come on,
out. You gotta check it out.
How old is that show now? 10 years? 15 years?
They just put it on Amazon Prime, full availability. There's kids out there. Gotta go watch it. Gotta go watch it.
That show.
Gotta go watch it. Okay, last one. This one, might even surprise myself, but it will be interesting to see what you have to say. Who is your best captain? You could go even if they were only on one episode, even if it was that.
Is Janeway the only female or the major female captain of all these TV shows?
I would say yes, except Discovery.
Discovery.
Yeah, Georgia Philippa O. Technically, she was the captain, but her Kanan character died, right? Then the alternate universe one came in, and then technically Commander Burnham became captain, but then she got court-martialed and all this other stuff. All right, so yeah, it's technically Captain Janeway is the only female consistent.
I like her because she seems human to me, right? Because when you think about a captain, in your mind, you're thinking about someone who's steel-willed and strong and have everything under control. But Janeway has a subtle sense of vulnerability to her role. You have, there were moments in that episode where she doesn't know what needs to go on, and she needs to rely on Chakotay, and she needs to rely on Tuvok to give her some guidance. And I like that. I feel like it is not, yes, in your role, you need to exhibit, what you're doing and have a sense of direction and a vision and optimism. But that doesn't define you and your command, and it's okay to kind of fall back from time to time and to listen to the people that you trust, and I don't know, I like that. I feel like she has that flexibility. She can be very strong-armed in people into doing things, but she also has this nice, vulnerable, you call it feminine, if you will, but a very nice other side to her that I enjoyed. That made her feel grounded. She's not just some super genius that I know what I'm going to do and I have the courage to do it. She is someone who is struggling, someone who doesn't know if she's going to succeed or not, but she has to take the risk.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you bring up a good point about Captain Janeway, and I think if you get a chance, I think the script writers did a good job of building some of that complexity in all their captains to an extent, right?
Yeah,
I think with Janeway they definitely did the full gamut, but it's also situational given the fact that they're stuck in the middle of nowhere, and she had to expand her horizons a little bit, to say the least, because they have no backup. I think with Star Trek Next Generation, Captain Picard is an exceptional captain. I always thought he's one of the best. He's one of my favorites just because he wasn't also an atypical actor who played him, right? It wasn't just the young, whatever looking character who was going to play him, right? Like the William Shatner type style back in the day, right? It was just like, who's this bald dude, man? It's like this bald 60-year-old, right? It was like he was very like, intelligent, in control. But there was episodes in Star Trek Next Generation where they made him extremely vulnerable. There was after, for example, they rescued him from the Borg. He was like,
wasn't he a Borg at one point?
yeah, he got converted to a Borg, right? Similar to Seven of Nine, and they were able to rescue him. But they actually spent a couple of episodes after exploring the impact that had on him and how it like emotionally, like he was basically broken down because of that, because he was he had no control, and he basically killed 10,000 of his fellow Starfleet officers, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't think they explored it enough as an adult looking back on it. They didn't do enough to go deeper into his character, because he had so many layers that he could have grown with or explored. But it was a big, that wasn't the way it was designed. My favorite captain, actually, if you get a chance to see, is Captain Sisko on Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
And I just like his story arc. Fresh-faced, commander, putting off to this far-off station. He just wanted to get away after losing his wife, trying to raise his son, trying to balance like the whole concept of Starfleet in a new way, because he basically had surrounded by this alien culture all the time that he suddenly became the prophet of, which was like kind of crazy. And then they kind of threw him into this war arc where he also was basically put into a position to question, like he had to do stuff that was not necessarily the Federation way, but he had to accept it because there was a greater good. Like there was this one episode where he basically did this special operations where he lied to the Romulans to get them into the war with the Dominion. But he had to accept, it's like the devil, to make it happen, even though it goes against everything he believed in, because there was a greater good. And you could see that struggle, and that's where that actor was like incredible. Like he was just like all over the board to help try to like bring this, to your point, this conflict to life. And he didn't have all the answers. He was never the smartest. He just created this beacon of belief that, hey, I can make it, like we could do this. So I thought he was like an exceptional character. Okay, two more, and then thank you very much for your time. I know I'm really taking you long, but I can't. Sometimes when you start talking about Star Trek, it's like you can really get in there. All right, the last two awards are kind of related, but they're in a way they're different. So the second last award I like to say is, what's the the Storytime Award for Best Story of all the Star Trek series. So the reason, before you answer, I'll explain why it's different than the last award, which is what's the best show out of all the Star Trek series. Now, the best story is, we all know that each series has their own story, right? Star Trek Next Generation is a story about a crew that is essentially just going through the everyday life of this journey of trying to search out new life. They don't go really beyond that. They don't do any multi-part episodes. There is no long story here, right? Deep Space Nine is a little different. They do the day-to-day, but really the story is about the space station's relationship with the Gamma Quadrant and the planet Bajor, and how they can get along as the center of the universe. And then obviously with Voyager, the story is gotta get home. Gotta get home. Yeah. Right? So I don't know, what story do you like? Or what is an interesting story to you?
I don't have,
style.
All three. All three. They have their own take. It's a different lens, right? They just take a different lens and put it into a different setting. It's difficult to compare because it's not an apple to apple comparison. Yeah. So this one is tough, right? I wouldn't know. Like I would say, whatever story that is true to their core messages, which is to promote hope, to promote inclusivity, to promote a more of a critical thinking, problem solving, persistence. I think that story wins, and I think all three of them would have achieved that. So yeah, I don't know. There's no clear winner. I will watch all three of them, and I would like all three of them. Depends on the mood of that time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you watch Star Trek, right, it is the overarching story, like especially with them going, 7, 8, 9 seasons long. The overarching story sometimes just they're not as important as, let's say, Breaking Bad, whereas the entire thing is story driven, and you want to see what happened. So yeah, I don't know. The story is very light. Like the long story is very light. But if you ask me my favorite episodes, I can tell you what those are.
Okay, give me one of your favorite episodes. Let's just go with that. What from Voyager? What would you say?
I'm a sucker for like time travel episodes on these type of shows because they tend to, they not just explore, how we're just talking about, the butterfly effect of time travel and how it changes the past, you change the future, and that's very cliche type of thing. There was one episode where Voyager was approaching a planet that was speeding up way too fast. That was spinning way too fast. I don't know if you recall that, where when the crew descended down there, that they have to get them back, otherwise they're going to be 1,000 of years have passed down in the surface, and how Voyager itself was seen as sort of a North Star because it's the brightest object in the sky, and everybody was trying to get that. I thought that was a fascinating episode. I thought it is time travel, but it is also an episode about symbols, about what people believing, the stories that they make of it, that change and drives the whole civilization. And how they eventually realize that their gods aren't really gods, and they're just another people from another planet. I don't know. There was something about it so intricate, and they were able to pack all of those ideas into a 45-minute episode. I love it.
Actually, you know what, I was gonna say in another episode, but I'll bring it up in a second. But there's a similar episode on Next Generation to that. Not so much the time thing, but the impact of what your beliefs could be on another culture, another generation. There was this one episode where Commander Data basically gets marooned on this planet, and he's trying to basically pick up this radioactive waste that from a satellite that crashed on this planet that was not really they hadn't evolved to the point of space, right? Like they're not even close. But they basically run up on this guy, Data, the local population. They're like, whoa, who's this guy? They think he's an ice creature because he has no pulse, no nothing. He's cold and everything, right? He's like, oh, you must be one of those famed ice creatures. But they take him in, make him part of their culture, right? And he can't remember anything because he got blown up a little bit, so he can't really remember what he is. But it's crazy because they basically take him in, he's part of their culture, and they also take in the radioactive waste that he had, and it starts making the whole place like sick, right? And they're like, oh, what the hell is happening? And they kind of start blaming him because he's the only thing that showed up. But he realizes that he doesn't know why, but he realizes that he is not he is scientifically something's not right here, and he figures out it's the metal, it's radiation, and he cures them. But they still basically get mad at him, and like they stab him, and they bury him because they just hit his power cell. Like how it relates to your thing is that it's just nothing is always what it seems from a relative perspective. Like from one person's position versus another person's position, you see it differently, because from the indigenous population perspective, similar to yours on the indigenous planet, Voyager was this star in the sky that defined generations of like, oh, is this a god or is this whatever? And until eventually they're like, what the hell? It's just a spaceship, right? Versus, and then in the case of Data, they're like, from the indigenous population perspective, they just see this as like oddity as the cause of all their problems because he just came out of nowhere, and it's just their perspective. Versus the other end of it, they look at it as completely different. And it's interesting. They always show different sides of a story, and I thought that was one of my most interesting episodes. I was going to say the best of both worlds, where Jean-Luc Picard gets turned into a Borg and they just go on a rampage. Part of it, then I realized that that's pure action, and the reason that was the rare like 100% action. It's like they actually lost, they actually look vulnerable, and I'm like, but when you brought up the time thing, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. That's pretty interesting. Okay, we're nearing the end. We're a little bit over, but I want to end off with, give me your 2-minute spiel about why Voyager is your favorite show, since I know it's the show that you like.
Well, it is a show I feel that has this overarching point of conveying optimism and hope, even though every episode has problems, and there were quite a few apocalyptic episodes in throughout the seasons. But the fact that the whole crew eventually they persisted, they never gave up, and there was always hope, and eventually paid off in a big way at the end. That made it worth watching. That made it worth looking forward to. When I was young, I was simply watching it because I like spaceships and I like people solving problems. But when you start to get a little older, you watch it because it's something soothing. I know my worldview might be a little pessimistic sometimes, but I mean, come on, like with the media telling you whatever is going on, it's a lot more challenging to be optimistic than it is to be pessimistic. But I feel like Voyager gave you something to look forward to, and I like that. And also, I think it's hands down got the best CG of all three.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
yeah. It's the latest one, right? It had all
it
the
is the
top
latest
of the line.
one.
Yeah.
It is the latest one, and I like it. And I think the custom, like the uniform design, I like the uniform design of all three. I've seen uniform of all three. Like the next generation, I don't understand why they have to have such a huge collar on their uniforms. Like sometimes you see the neck bones almost sometimes.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't look very comfortable for me. I feel like your uniform should be like a suit jacket, right? You gotta have an undershirt and you have something else on it. And it's more functional to me.
I'm not gonna lie. Every time I saw the Voyager's nacelles like bend upwards, it gave me the chills. I like that one. I also like their beginning score of the Voyager show.
Yeah, it's epic.
I really like that one. That one was
Epic.
really good. That
It's very epic, and there's nothing like and at the beginning score like it doesn't show a face.
Mm.
I think it's all about the ship. I think it's all about just where the ship travels.
Yeah.
It's a nice show, and I'm sure the other ones are great, but Voyager's got the best CG.
Close to your heart. Close to your heart.
Best CG, best uniforms. I wouldn't say the best looking ship. I mean, it's not bad, but yeah.
It was a good show. It was a good show. They're all good shows. You know, honestly, Star Trek, life changing.
Yeah. How's the new Picard show?
I actually need to go watch that one. This is where the lack of television has hurt me, but I gotta watch that one because I was about to say, but I had no evidence to back it up. But that is the continuating story of 7 and 9, and it's from the trailers that I saw, it looked like she changed quite drastically. So, so I gotta watch that one. I definitely gotta watch that one. Yeah. Oh well, okay. Well, I've held you long enough, James. I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been an exceptional conversation. You know, you definitely helped me see some things in Voyager that I never saw. I hope I've enticed you a little bit to see, maybe check out Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. There are two of my favorites as well, but all the Star Trek I love, and my kid will be definitely streaming that on regular once they're ready to absorb that, and maybe maybe we won't hear stuff like saying that stuff's not possible or that stuff looks cheesy because it's not quite there yet, but some of the stuff is already here, so we might be already too late by the time they're old enough, right? So, but thank you again. It's a pleasure having you as a guest of the Continental.
Pleasure's all mine.
For those of you watching, if you like what you see, please subscribe, like, comment to James, comment to myself. If you don't agree with anything we talked about in Star Trek, we got anything wrong, please let us know. We'd love to give you some feedback more. James, I really hope to have you back again. There's a lot of sci-fi left to talk about in this universe, and we've just scratched the surface on the Continental podcast. So,
thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So, as always, it's a pleasure to serve you on the Continental. We hope to see you again. Thank you very much.